Podcast Day. For those of you who have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, this is a day created by Dave and Steve Lee back in 2014 to basically not just honor the medium, but to showcase the medium and the people in it. And in the sport of wrestling, we've had a lot of wrestling podcasts come and go. My first one was back in 2008. The first one I can actually track down, I think, was Mat Slammers, which were started by two guys out in western Iowa in 2006. Since then, I think we're up to 121 that have come and gone. I'm adding more to the directory every day at madtalkonline.com/directory. Today, it's going to be a 14-hour marathon. I'm starting with Sam Eagan, a member of the Bills Mafia, former wrestler at the University of Wyoming, New York native, and actually, while not an active podcaster, somebody who has actually got more gritty behind-the-scenes details in the last year than probably any other wrestling podcaster or wrestling-related podcaster I know. Sam, 1, welcome to International Podcast Day. 2, welcome to the Speakeasy. And 3, just welcome, man.
JB, I appreciate it, man. I'm excited to be here. It's good to finally get to talk well, sort of in person, obviously, but yeah,
sort of in person. So what the key is here is you were working basically in media production and such at Wyoming, and basically tell us how you got into the world of podcasting first before we get to the wrestling stuff.
So I sort of first broke into like the podcasting, audio, public radio world in my junior year of college at Wyoming. I had a pretty bad knee injury and couldn't wrestle over winter break. So I'm stuck in Laramie, Wyoming. It's cold, it's snowy. Not a lot to do other than like rehab my knee and sit at practice. So a friend of mine was working at Wyoming Public Radio. So I gave him a call, asked if I could intern there, came in the next day, and they needed help with their podcasts. And so I started producing podcasts for them. And the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, when you get into the podcast production side, what is basically the routine for you? What is it that you actually do when you say, "Oh, I'm a podcast producer"? Now people are familiar with podcasts; you don't have to explain that to them as much. But when you get to the nitty gritty, this is something that's not just okay, hit record, upload, and you're done.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. This is something I actually deal with often. It's funny you ask because it's a lot of the time it's like I tell people, "Oh, I work in podcast production," and that, like their mind first goes to like I don't know, like Joe Rogan, you know. Which is, I mean, not to diminish Joe Rogan, but a lot of it is just like hit record, let's just chat. And what I do is more long form documentary, narrative style podcasting. So what that means is my day to day is sort of everything that you would think of in a journalist. I'm calling sources, I'm pulling archival audio, I'm assembling stories in Pro Tools. So there's still a lot of talking. A lot of interviewing, but maybe a little bit less than what people their minds first go to.
So when people are actually talking, say the one show that I first discovered you through was Mobituaries, which is hosted by Rocca, who I first discovered at the Daily Show way back in the day. I mean, I'm trying to think, was that probably early Jon Stewart era, and then the theme of that show. So the way I understand it, so you were doing a lot of the interviewing, or was that Mo doing a lot of the interviewing, and you were piecing it together?
So if it's the week before an interview, Mo says we're talking to, for the last episode we interviewed Fred Armisen. We're talking to Fred Armisen. I am pulling research. I'm spending the week researching Fred. I'm pulling clips that Mo is going to want to show to Fred. I am drafting a list of questions. I'm helping him prep for the interview, and then the time comes for the interview, and I'm running the board. I'm sort of sitting in the back seat, helping guide him through. At this point, I familiarize myself with the subject enough that if Mo has a question mid-interview, I'm the person who's supposed to jump in and say, "Oh no, this," or "Oh no, that." So although I'm not really not yet, at least in my life, not the voice on the mic, I'm around.
Yeah, and you're now working with Vice, and you've got 2 shows you're working with there. Explain a little bit about what Vice News Reports is and in the other shows, and how you fit compared to what you were doing at CBS to what you're doing now with Vice.
So Vice News Reports is a weekly documentary style podcast that is going to take listeners sort of behind the scenes, so to speak, of sort of getting away from the sort of horse race day-to-day political coverage and the horse race day-to-day news coverage, and isolate one particular issue and take listeners deep into it. Our host is Ariel Duham Ross, who is a fantastic reporter. She spent 5-6 years with Vice prior to jumping ships and going to Vox, and now is back at Vice. We're excited to have her. It kicks off October 15th is the first episode. Can't tell you exactly what yet, but you can expect the trailer.
I've got a pretty good idea based on what many people witnessed on Tuesday night. There could be a theme coming from that the next couple episodes.
Yeah, you'd actually be surprised. Kind of trying to avoid that stuff.
So did I. I didn't watch a single second of it. Twitter was all I needed for that. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna nope.
And I think that's what's so cool about working with a place like Vice. And they do have these people who are working on those, like, sort of just day to day. This is what's happening. But so much of what we do is focused on the news that you don't know about and you don't know that you should know about. And I think that that's where we're going to take people, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
A couple questions already jumping in. So if you're watching, you can throw your comments in through Twitch, through YouTube, through Periscope, via Twitter. Right now, already JP Pearson's explaining that what we call winter, it's snowy, because you had Wyoming, I've got Minnesota. I am not really looking forward to this winter by any stretch of the imagination. Mac Beasy right there's asking our first question from the user. What about Bajrang? Tell me about Bajrang, man.
Bajrang is our one true savior. Best wrestler on the planet, bar none. I would die for that man. Nothing else needs to be said. Bajrang boys for life.
Yeah, Zach Goldrosen, who actually has a victory over Dylan Dennis, actually says, "Hey, that's my legitimate business partner."
Yeah, we are the true one CEOs of Dirty Style Wrestling. Went and got it trademarked. Working on the LLC. Excuse me, other way around. Got the LLC. Working on the trademark. Gonna swoop that out from underneath the snake oil salesman that shall not be named.
Yeah, he has. Yeah, I already blasted him once on this show. It won't happen again. Now, when we get to the world of podcasting and then tying it into wrestling, there's very, very little crossover. What have you found in your travels and your discussions with your wrestling friends? What they listen to podcasts that are outside of the FRL, the Short Time, the Blood Round? What shows do you find your friends in the wrestling world are actually consuming?
I'm going to be honest, not a lot, and that's sort of
if it's serial, and that's kind of like the introduction to people's podcasting in a lot of places.
I think that I was going to say serial. I think that a few of my friends listen to the Daily. You got to remember that I lived in Wyoming for a long time, and so it's not like people are what they would often consider to be the liberal media. They're not necessarily going to go consume a New York Times podcast or an NPR podcast.
Whether or not there's content there that is politically agnostic, I'm not going to make this show political. I can guarantee you that. Sorry. It's just, again, that feedback though, because when you work for a CBS, when you work for a Vice, the premonition for some people is like, oh, well, mainstream media or liberal media or your agenda-based media. And that's one thing I like about wrestling coverage for the most part. When you're an agenda-based media outlet, you're like an Iowa alum or a Penn State alum or a Cornell alum, something like that. Nothing is, it's divisive to us, but nothing is as grossly divisive as politics can be.
Yeah, it's small potatoes compared to it. And I think that when you're talking about media bias in a wrestling podcast, it's people are wearing their heart on their sleeve. There's no hidden I'm secretly an Iowa fan. There's no hidden I'm secretly a Penn State fan. Everybody's owning it, and it's all good fun.
Yeah, you find in wrestling, it's like, well, your alma mater, for example. I don't know anybody that hates Wyoming, because it's like, okay, it's like the Minnesota Twins to me. It's like, oh, cool, good for them. And I don't mean that to disparage the great work that Mark Branch has done, but it's like until they start to threaten you, then they're just like, okay, I can root for Wyoming. Like Oklahoma State Cowboy fans are probably rooting for Wyoming, except when they come into Gallagher, Iba, or return the trip up there. Speaking of returning the trips up there, what's it like to witness teams come in to Laramie and just die from the altitude?
Oh, I loved it. It was definitely something that we banked on. It was something that, and I was always sort of even before I got to Wyoming, I wasn't necessarily the most athletic guy, but I was a goer.
I'm with you there.
So I knew that.
Actually, I'm with you with the non-athletic, but I'm not much of a goer. So yeah.
Well, I was a small heavyweight, so my logic was just pulling people's heads, take them down at a third, and then as many times as I got to. So it was just a cultural fit for me, and it was definitely something that we leaned into. And I'm sure people have told you this. There's nothing quite like feeling someone break, And Laramie is the place to do that.
Yeah, and what people don't know is Laramie is I believe, by altitude, the highest elevated Division I wrestling, the arena there.
7220.
Yeah, because in Colorado Springs, where I live, most people think, Denver, mile high. Well, that's 5,280 feet. Colorado Springs is like 60-something, and because Air Force is pretty high. But when you get to Laramie, I've drove through bits of Wyoming once. I've never actually spent any considerable time, unless you consider driving through Lusk on the way to Fargo considerable time. Really don't. I haven't really experienced that 8,000 feet altitude. I mean, those of you who are kickball fans know that when the U.S. goes into Ecuador for a friendly, that's over 10,000 feet. So it is. How much did it affect you when you first got to Wyoming?
So at the time, so I'm originally from Utah. So I'd previously lived in altitude, so to speak. But I spent the last 5-6 years up in Western New York, where I think the elevation is like 100 feet, and it's also super humid. And I think that people always talk about the elevation, and like that takes a while to get used to, and it really sucked. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I was huffing and puffing, but for me, for a solid year, it was so dry in Laramie because it's so high that my nose bled every practice.
Oh, how about hand lotion? Like I remember moving to Colorado Springs, and I'm talking with Zeke Jones in the USA Wrestling office, and it's like, and I've got this just bottle of lotion. I'm sitting there just like, I'm dry and crackly. It's just I felt like Ashy Larry from freaking Dave Chappelle.
It's just really bad.
It's bad.
I remember like my first few months, my neck bled a few times because I was a guy named Leland Pfeiffer, who's since graduated, but was like the ultimate just goer, just pull on your head. And he's just like, I'm a big fat freshman heavyweight, and he's just beating me up, and my neck is so dry, and he's just pulling on it. And we're like outside because it's preseason hand fighting. And I feel like it's like, I go and check, and there's like blood on my neck because like my skin was so dry.
What are you doing?
And I'm so new. I didn't know what to do. And Branch is just like, wrap it up, man. I just have like a neck thing. So it was bad. I think, and I think the elevation for me was, it takes about a month to get used to. I think the first week is really, really bad, and it kind of shocks people, but I think you get used to it a lot quicker than people think.
So I guess the question I have is, how does somebody, Utah, I wasn't aware of that, but the Western New York to Wyoming was like the what? So having lived out west before, going to Wyoming wasn't a stretch for you. Talk about, the journey to Laramie.
So I was born in Salt Lake City, lived in Salt Lake until I was 13, 14 years old. My dad got a job in Western New York that moved us out to a town called Churchville, tiny little dairy town. About 35 minutes outside Rochester, like 45 outside Buffalo, kind of smack dab between the two. Excuse me. So moved up there when I was 14, picked up wrestling while I was there, my first year there. Had never done it in my life. Everybody else in my family were hockey players. It's a lot of D1 athletes, but my dad played D1 hockey at Princeton. My uncle played hockey at Yale. Our other uncle played football at Utah. No one had ever wrestled. So I somehow found that. I'm remembering now. I haven't thought about this in forever. My dad brought home a flyer, and I wasn't really playing sports at the time. I was kind of just a lazy bum, and he was like, just sort of put it in my face, and he was like, "You're doing this." And went to my first practice. Didn't really like it, but my dad made me keep going. I was like 13, and I was so frankly fat that I had to wrestle like 15-year-olds in like off-season tournaments, and I was just getting beat up, and I hated it, but kept doing it. Got in better shape. And then I guess one thing or another ended up being not that bad. Got on the state podium my junior year. And then the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I was going out to visit family in Utah. Almost all of my extended family lives out there. And my dad mentioned in passing, he was like, there's a camp in Wyoming, at University of Wyoming. Do you want to just like do like a double header and like spend a week with your family and then go out there to Laramie? And I was like, what? Why? I was not into it.
Gee, Dad, let's take a vacation first back to Utah, and then let's double up on the squarish states and go north, okay?
Yeah, and it's
a little notch there. I mean, a little rectangle.
And the thing is, like, even especially in Utah, I think there's sort of this reputation of like Wyoming just being the only reason people go to Wyoming from Utah is to buy beer. That's the only reason. Because the beer is stronger.
Well, actually, I believe Minnesota is the last state to do the 3-2 thing. I think every state has abandoned that. I
Do
remember.
they do that still? I didn't know Minnesota did that at all.
Well, it's because it's the only place you can get it in like grocery stores or whatnot. But
Uh,
yeah, so and living. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we'd have to cross the border to get certain substances like grain in Virginia, or if somebody had a military ID. So I'm familiar with the crossing of the borders to get. Oh, like here, you got to cross the border to get spotted cow here in Minnesota to get the good old Wisconsin stuff. So. Anyway,
yeah,
when we get to the wrestling side of thing, of course, question there from another friend out in the Twitterverse. What does Sam think about the state of New York City wrestling?
so some may know I am I'm a high school coach with Grand Street High School in Brooklyn. Had a solid few years. I've been there 2 years. We've won the city championship back-to-back years. I think that New York City wrestling is growing. It's maybe not growing at the exponential rate that it was, peak 2011, 12, 13 when Beat the Streets was just taking over the planet. But it's steady, and I think it's more sustainable. Our team put a guy on the podium this year, took fourth in New York State. I mean, that's the best I ever did. Kid's solid. We put a kid on the podium the year before. I think this year we put 3 or 4 kids cumulatively from the state, maybe even 5. On the podium. It was one of the best finishes we've ever had. It's coming along, man. It's obviously got it's got its trials and tribulations, so to speak. It's got its issues. I think the biggest being the way that New York City wrestling operates and high school sports operate. You can't join a high school team as a 7th or 8th grader because the schools are separate. There's not really school districts. Kids go to schools all over the city. They apply to different schools. So in New York State, everyone else upstate, Long Island, they can all start wrestling in 7th and 8th grade. So when you get to that state level, we have like our best guys a lot of them have never wrestled until high school. So they get good enough to get to the state tournament their junior, senior year. They've been wrestling 2 years. They're wrestling kids who, first of all, have been wrestling since they were 7. And second of all, been wrestling high school wrestling since they were 13. So there's this huge gap in experience that like we just have to accept and work with. I mean, like control what you can and just don't worry about everything else. And that's what we try to do. But it's coming along. I think that it's only gonna be up from here. And I think that like what I try to get our kids recruited. I mean, just some of the kids that we work with, like the stuff that they've been through in their lives. I mean, these are people that you want on your team. They're maybe not, if you're a college coach, they're maybe not they don't have the most accolades, but these are kids who are tough. They know how to fight. They know how to multitask. They know how to they're coachable. Just great attitudes and great life skills.
Couple more questions coming in from our friends in the Twitterverse. Is question one. I dig the Public Enemy poster that's just over your shoulder, having been an aficionado of Public Enemy since I was a kid. But the question is, what's the poster to the left of the bathrobe here?
Right there?
Yeah,
that's a Red Hot Chili Peppers poster.
Okay, got me there too.
Should I show it, or what are we gonna do?
I mean, well, first of all, it depends on the album. So how old is that thing?
It is really old, but it's not an album. It's a show poster.
Okay, show poster. What year? That'll tell me what really old is in your mind.
Can you see it?
Let's see it. 89. Okay, that typically, that classifies as old. I was 10, so it definitely precedes Mother's. Pretty much, I think it's close around the Mother's Milk era, if I'm not mistaken.
Mother's Milk was 89.
Okay, yeah, so I was nailed the era. It was pre-Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which I think is where most people discover, at least of my age, discovered the Chili Peppers because, I mean, Under the Bridge, the slow, oh, wow, that's a cool song, and then they come in with some of the harder stuff. I remember my mom took the tape from me because I got it from Columbia House, and it's like had parental advisory, explicit lyrics on it, and she found it, yoinked it. So, 10th grader. So
it's Blood Sugar Sex Magic is the best album, period, ever to me. That's my favorite band.
Okay. Gotcha.
That is just such an amazing piece of work.
I always think it's funny when you come across a song like that's buried deep in an album or something that's from an older track that you never heard get radio airplay. I mean, like Iggy Pop songs that show up as like television bed music. I mean, like I think The Passenger was it's a
B-side, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was one of the shows on like either Discovery or something like that, and then. was it Me and My Friends or Fight Like a Brave, and was one of the tracks from Micro's Dirty Jobs. So it was. I
Really?
can't remember right off the top of my head, but it's definitely. I was like, I know that hook. So
And they were in particular really into like B-sides in general. They have so much like unreleased music and so many B-sides. It's still, and I think that I have probably dang near every song they've ever made on like my Spotify or like my Apple Music. And
yeah, they're not my go-to. I mean, my go-to is typically kind of like, if you're an XM radio listener, like the Turbo, which is like the 90s 2000s metal. So before we get into the Nickelback crap, then we into the more of the Pantera. Give me the Tool, the Pantera. Give me the grunge from on Lithium. So that's kind of my with a side view of okay, yeah, you got that. I saw him live at Lollapalooza with Korn and Snoop Dogg back in '97. Yeah. So Orbital,
that's cool.
Orbital closed the show with like this light show. We're getting way off the podcast. I'm fine with that because we're going to get a lot of this because we can only talk wrestling and podcasting so much. And Sam's got a hard stop at 9:30 Central Time because time zones are funny things when you go from mountain to eastern back to mountain back to eastern.
Messes me up, but I'm actually going to be out in. I'm heading out to Wyoming to sort of visit some friends for I think about a month, so I'm gonna have to adjust. I'm gonna be working like 7 to 3 every day at least. It's gonna be kind of tough.
What's it like going from Laramie to like the biggest city in the world?
It's so weird. I mean, even like I think that there's this sort of. I tell my friends this. There's this like when I was living in Laramie, I was sort of like the token city guy, even though I lived on a farm in Western New York. But everyone was like, "Oh, you're the guy from New York. Like you're the city slicker." And then now living in New York, I'm like everybody's token hick friend, so to speak. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're the guy who lived in Wyoming." So I sort of stuck between two worlds.
They could also blame that on being with the Buffalo stuff too. Oh, you're the hick from Buffalo.
Even though Buffalo's like a city of 2 million. It's like one of the bigger cities in the country.
I mean, there's more people in a city block than there were in Laramie. Something like that, right?
Yeah, no. So I live in a neighborhood called Greenpoint, which is like the far northern, like the most northern tip of Brooklyn, and just in the like 10 block north-south area, there's like 75,000 people, and Laramie with the college is like 40,000, I think, and then without the college is like 25.
So what's a summer in Laramie like with no school or no mass students?
I was talking about this the other day because we're doing we're working on a sports story that's sort of similar to this. It's sort of like it's kind of like the NBA bubble. It's just all you do is we went home, played video games. Some Busch Lights were for sure consumed.
Official beer of Iowa.
That's right.
Is it the official beer of Wyoming as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna say
okay.
It's just a slobber knocker between Coors and
my God, yeah, we could play the Jim Ross drinking game all night here.
But I'm a Coors man, but like I'm not gonna turn down a Busch Latte. So it's just wake up in the morning. If you got a job, go work. I bartended.
Must be hard if everybody's drinking Coors Light in Busch.
I'm not I'm not a good bartender. It was like Coors Light, whiskey Coke, rum Coke, Coors Light, Busch Light. So I'm not making you a Cosmo, but so you wake up, go to work, go to practice, play video games. It's pure. It's just fun. And Laramie is like for 8 months a year, it's hell. It's cold and windy and miserable. But you live for those 4 months where it's 75 degrees every day and there's not a cloud in the sky and it don't rain. Love it. Like I cannot say enough positive things about Laramie in the summer. Those are some of the best memories of my life.
Spinning back things around to while we're here, International Podcast Day, not sure what Vice or any of the other podcast groups that you've been associated with are aware of, because it seems like when you talk about podcasting in the North, they call it that Northeast bubble, the independent podcasting circuit does, of like, okay, the NPR shows, the public radio shows, the things like that, they tend to live in their own world. How do you see what is in their world versus what you've seen with your experience at CBS and now at Vice?
That's an interesting question. It's not something that I've thought about. I think that
because you're pressing the buttons, you're not necessarily the voice and the distributor. You're not necessarily you don't seem like you have to be in the space in terms of the social discussion about it as much as you are in the trenches of building the shows.
And I think that like just the biggest difference is going to be, I think that companies like CBS and companies like Vice are, I mean, they're like, there's just no way around it. It's a capitalist country. These are profit-making entities. And I think that the goal, first and foremost, a lot of times is going to be to make money. And that's just not the case with these public radio shows. So I think that there's the benefit in that if you're doing like Fresh Air, like they can do whatever they want because it's like they're doing it sort of for the people, for the love of the podcast. But I think that, so they're maybe a bit more free to try different things. But then at the same time, like Vice News has built this massive team of incredible journalists and incredible podcasters in a really short period of time. This time in April, there was like 8 people on staff, and we're sitting at 24 or 25 now. They've grown this huge team to do something completely new. And there's this sort of freedom in not having what we do defined. We're making it up as we go. And I think it's going to change the medium in some ways. I think that I've always been really surprised that Vice didn't have a huge podcasting team. It seems like it was something that would very, very much fit their style of journalism, especially because like you can take a microphone places you can't take a camera. People are just less uncomfortable with a microphone. And yeah, I'm getting off topic, but
well, there's a lot of things that the podcasting community does that, you know, when we think about our drama in wrestling, we think about whether it be, we were talking about media biases and things like that earlier. Mm-hmm. It's like, we kind of have that in the podcasting space where, like, for example, this show, this today, I sent it over to Pod News, which is a daily update, about 2-3 minutes, and it got in there. And I'm like, yes! Not everybody that's an independent has that opportunity. But again, guys like James Cridland are like, yes, we are. He covers everything from Australia independently. So that's a cool thing. So again, it's one of those things where you hear about, I think it's Nick Quaw's Hot Pod, or they're not going to pay attention to anything I'm doing because their shows and their newsletters about what they're interested in, which is mostly the Northeast and the NPR type of bubble type of shows.
And I think it's also Hot Pod is looking at things that are just like sort of weird and different. And
well, you want to talk about weird and different? 14 hours of wrestling podcasters. That's weird and different.
This is weird and different. And I think that anytime you do something different, it's risky, but there's an opportunity there, an opportunity to stand out, and I think you're doing that. And this is cool.
One of the last questions we got before we got to let you go is from our friend the Bulldog. Bro, do you even lift? I'm paraphrasing, by the way.
TCOB.
I'm not. I'm just a caveman. I'm not down with your weird cryptic Diamond Club type of stuff. I don't. Yeah.
If you have to ask, I can't tell you.
That's on a bar somewhere, and it took me years to figure out what the last 3 letters meant.
I do not lift. Bulldog, you know this. I don't lift. I don't believe in working out anymore. Branch took it out of me. He got it. He took everything I had for 4 years, and I periodically, probably once or twice a week, I go for a 3-4 mile run. I'm done lifting, man. I don't like it. I don't. Maybe that's why I was such a small heavyweight. Don't like lifting.
12-ounce curls. All right, last thing. Here's the pitch. Where can they out there if they're like, okay, we know Sam from Twitter, but wait, he has a real job that doesn't involve wrestling? He talked about wrestling, but you have a real job. Tell us about where we can check out these shows on Vice that you're working on.
So you can find Vice News Podcast pretty much wherever you get your podcasts, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
Wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Wherever they're sold.
Free, by the way. These aren't sold.
These are free. They are Painkiller is currently out right now. It's an amazing podcast about the fentanyl crisis. It's a long-form documentary.
I'm not going to make light of that crisis, but did you by chance get a chance to license Painkiller by Judas Priest as the song intro?
We didn't. It's a lot of like moody synthy music. But it's cool. And
Rob Halford blaring, "This is that." Not quite going to do it for that show.
Wouldn't fit the mood. But you can find
understand it.
You can find Painkiller out right now. Vice News Reports comes out October 15th, and will be continuing weekly into early next year, every Thursday. And the other show, which I actually can't talk about directly, well, you can expect a documentary anthology series coming out that I work on in January 2021. And you can follow me on Twitter at Sam_Eagan.
At Sam_Eagan. Our first guest to kick off International Podcast Day, Wrestling Edition, Sam Eagan from Vice. We'll be sure to talk about things you got going on. We'll actually bring you on for a proper short time here in the future. But for right now, we got to let you go. And folks, we've got about a 30-minute gap here, so I'm going to basically still readjusting, get things on. We'll leave the stream up, leave your comments in there. Be back at 10 o'clock Central Time. I'll be back at 10 o'clock Central Time with Anthony and Gennaro Bonaventura of D3 Nation. Talk a little D3 wrestling. So, Sam, appreciate the time, man, and being the guinea pig here the first time out for International Podcast Day Wrestling Edition.
Happy to do it, JB. This is awesome. Good talking, man.
Yep.
See you later.